back in 1984 when the federal government allocated $24 million to Carrington Slipways to build 2 fiberglass prototype mine hunters. Both have been launched and are now halfway through a 2-year evaluation period, with a third now under construction at the high-tech factory at Tomago. Now the opposition claims that the cost of the mine hunter project has blown out almost fourfold to $100 million. Shadow Defence Minister Peter White claims today that major problems exist with the rush cutter and the shoalwater mine hunters. These include an inefficient sonar system, which will track down the mines, and vessel handling problems, which limit the use of the catamarans to operation in swells less than 1.5 metres. Mr. White further claims that the Navy has now sent a team overseas to investigate the possibility of leasing or buying a mine hunter off the shelf. Carrington Slipways Chief Don Laverick says the mine hunters were built on a fixed price contract which was completed on time and budget. He admits the sonar is experiencing problems but claims this is not a fault in the shipbuilding. Mr. Laverick says all reports from the Navy have indicated it is happy with the mine hunter's seaworthiness, which was designed only to operate in harbours, rivers and estuaries. The spokesman for Kim Beazley denies there's been a cost overrun, saying that $100 million was allocated for the entire project development, from construction through to extensive testing and evaluation.
Musselbrook had never seen anything like it as 17 carriages carrying 200 journalists rolled into the railway station. The train is providing accommodation and transport for those attending the International Federation of Agricultural Journalists' 6th World Congress. It's being held in Australia for the first time. Organised by the Australian Council of Agricultural Journalists, it's attracted participants from more than 20 countries. International Federation President-elect Alf Skepstedt of Norway is just one of the journalists taking a look at a cross-section of Australian agricultural production.
You say we are always subsidizing things, you know, in Europe and in America and everywhere else. And it can be interesting to see if you are subsidizing anything yourself. That's very difficult to get a knowledge about. I'm sure you somewhere have something hidden.
Enjoying a chicken and champagne lunch at Musselbrook is just one part of the Congress, which has also taken the overseas visitors to Sydney, Canberra and Orange. It's hoped Australia's agricultural merits will be recognised and improve trade.
All we wanted to do was to bring overseas agricultural journalists to Australia so they can understand that we're an efficient producer of primary produce, and to get the message across to the rest of the world about what Australia is all about.
The conference ends tomorrow, but this afternoon visitors had the chance to see Australian stock horses at work and at play. For this Japanese journalist, the opportunity to ride a horse was too good to miss. In his country, he says horses are expensive. What's your interest in the Australian stock horse? $15,000 and $20,000 each, but they do have their uses.
We have horse races. Also, it's people is eating horse, import, horse meat. Yes.
What the deal does include is a 54-room motel, a convention centre, 3 restaurants and a wine tasting and sales area. The 90 hectares of land also includes picnic and parking areas and a children's playground. Looking over the complex today, Corporate Progress Chairman, local vineyard Neil Sutherland, and Managing Director, Newcastle property developer John Thompson, said a further $2 million is to be spent. Mr Sutherland outlined just what will be happening to the prominent Hunter landmark.
We're interested in things like wine cinoramas, educational aspects of the valley, the heritage of the wine industry here in the Hunter, and good entertainment all around, including an amphitheatre, all that sort of thing.
Mr Sutherland stressed that Corporate Progress is a public company and he's keen to see the Hunter populace invest in its own future.
And we are interested, of course, in equity participation, and the funds will come from the public. And it also gives the local Hunter people an opportunity to invest in something that's theirs, and we think this is a great step forward.
Neil Sutherland is no newcomer to the area, having established his Deasy's Road vineyard at Brecolben in 1979. A winery and tasting room followed a couple of years ago, and his wines have met with a degree of success at interstate shows. But now he's widening his Hunter investments and will be looking at other projects to acquire and develop.
There's a hat-trick. Tony Kozier is in the com-box with him, Bill Lowe.
And not too far from that edge.
Last ball where Vivian Richards took his 100th catch. Lovely catch from Viv Richards. So that was the last ball of the Australian innings and the last ball Walsh bowled in that innings. And then he came in to bowl to Mike Valletto. It was a real loosener to Valletto in this innings. The batsman who swing it away on the onside. It was a very loose-looking shot, batting one position lower than normal, and was LBW. So that was 3 wickets from successive balls bowled by Walsh.
Although not specifically directed to local institutions, Dr Bennett's criticism regarding medication has come during his visit to the region. While here, he has seen Morisset and the Hunter hospitals, the Living Skills Centre in Newcastle and group home caretakers. He was invited to Australia by the State Health Department to advise and comment on psychiatric rehabilitation facilities. The doctor has a long list of credits. He's lectured all over the globe and has worked as an advisor to the World Health Organization. Internationally, he says, rehabilitation facilities are patchy, but in New South Wales there are more good patches than bad. What's good about them here?
Well, I think it's really the move towards supporting people who are living in their own communities, supporting their families and working with them and showing them how to care for their sick relatives. If they're able to do it, and if not, reacting very quickly and taking those people into hospital and helping them there.
However, he says there's always room for improvement, and he'll point out some weak points to the health department.
I think sometimes in hospital people are having rather too much medication, by English standards anyhow. I think on the other hand, in the community people seem to be having rather less. I think it needs careful checking.
He says there should also be more therapeutic support for staff. Overall, though, Dr Bennett says he's seen a lot of good ideas in Australia, which he'll take back to England with him.
The Hunter Valley continued on its winning way in the world of wine this year, although there were some tense days in February when unseasonably heavy rains threatened the crop. Harvest was underway when the rains came, and as the mechanical harvesters ground to a halt in the wet soil, teams of hand pickers were called in, doing battle with the mud to get the grapes out. At the time, growers were in danger of losing a potentially record crop.
Basically what's happened with the rain is the berries swell up. Those that are inside the bunch will split, and then that juice is running out and it goes mouldy, and you start to get the rot then in the vine. And if you get too much of that, you then end up with a dirty, rotten, mouldy character in the wine.
Nevertheless, the rain did stop and the Colburn area enjoyed one of its largest harvests ever. The reds suffered a little from too much moisture, but the same yielded full-bodied whites, which won the acclaim of judges at the annual Hunter Valley Wine Show at Singleton. More than 500 varieties were sampled by the judges before they made their choice of the year's top wines.
After 3 days of judging, Wyndham Estate Wines emerged well ahead as the most successful exhibitor. The most successful small producer was Alan Mere Wines, and the most successful current release dry red went to Saxon Vale. The most successful current release dry white was Cassegrain Vineyard, and finally the most successful vintage champagne went to Hungerford Hill Wines.
According to the judges, 1988 was a good year, but noticeably affected by the unseasonal rain.
This has had the effect of producing wines in 1988 that are elegant. They're good quality and very high quality, in fact, but they tend to be more elegant than they do in a dry year.
Hunter Valley grape growers also benefited this season from big losses through hailstorms and frost in the southern New South Wales and Victorian grape growing regions. The shortage meant top prices were paid for our grapes, though the inflation was also reflected on the shelves, the price of table wines rising significantly this year. The acceptance of Hunter wines overseas also continued to grow this year. However, not all was rosy. In many of the offcuts, staff are finding exactly what they are looking for. This is the grub form of what some consider a major threat to the lucrative Hunter wine industry.
Where it occurs in the Colburn area, there is
Bora and testing insecticides to combat it when it emerges from the vines in its adult form. Big longer corn is in fact native to Australia. The Department of Agriculture has allocated $21,000 for a year of research into the
other is what is the long-term effect to a vineyard. As far as loss of yield is concerned, we can't measure it. I mean, there is no way. I'm not saying that there isn't a loss of yield. There may be, but I don't know, and I don't think we can record that. As far as the long-term influence in a vineyard, well, you only have to look at the damage to realise that there's got to be a reduction in the lifespan of a vineyard.
The rural population was galvanised into political action as rarely before in the lead-up to the state elections in March this year. The reason? New gun laws introduced by Premier Barry Unsworth. Many farmers felt the laws which required them to licence their firearms and banned semi-automatic rifles from their basic rights. There were massive protest meetings in many rural centres where the usually passive communities made their anger clear. Many voted in line with those feelings. There was a large swing away from Labor in many rural seats in March, and Mr Unsworth later admitted that the gun laws were largely responsible for his defeat. The new government repealed the gun laws legislation soon after gaining office. 1988 was a busy year at the CB Alexander College at Paterson. In April, last year's graduates were given their day in the sun, 56 receiving certificates and 32 receiving advanced certificates for completed courses. The college has been training the next generation of farmers for 23 years, but also plays an important role in adult education. This year it was the venue for the launch of an important take-home degree compiled by the Department of Agriculture for property owners. Facing Your Future on the Land has proved popular among farmers wanting to get the best from their investments.
We've gone from the situation of, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago where you had a lot of help on the farm. Nowadays that there's many owner-operators and you just don't have time.
Tocal again hosted the Small Farms Field Days this year, held in near-perfect weather in May. The field days are growing in importance amongst small area farmers, many travelling from as far away as the Upper Hunter and the Central Coast to attend. This year the field days featured the usual wide array of rural exhibits, from those designed to interest the man on the land to those appealing to the next generation. Organiser Barry Bailey says the days will continue to grow as long as they meet a real need.
There has been over the last 10 years a tremendous expansion in small farm operations, and a lot of those people really haven't had any previous experience in agriculture, and the objective of these field days is to provide them with that information that they need.
Tocal also continued this year to act as a venue for a wide range of specialist courses as well. Among them a judging school for young cattle men and women conducted by the Australian Poll Hereford Association. Scone celebrated May in traditional fashion with its annual Horse Week, a salute to the beast which put the area on the map. The Horse Week parade featured almost all aspects of the town's social life and, of course, horses in all shapes and sizes. The scone sales held in the same week have long been a feature on the national horse buying calendar. This year they attracted bidders from across the country.
Buyers, I'm going to sell 7,000, you hear the sale, 7,000 old buyer.
1988 will also be remembered as the year of some of the heaviest autumn rains on record, a time remembered with pain by many rural producers. Much of the lower Hunter lay underwater for days after the rains. Amongst the worst hit were vegetable growers, powerless to save their crops, which rotted in the fields.
We've lost, I'd say, nearly every cabbage there, which could have amounted to about $25,000 worth of produce, and the collies, there's going to be a considerable lot of collies lost. I wouldn't like to venture as to what they would be worth.
And the shortage more than here 200 was felt here. Growers from as far afield as Brisbane took advantage of the local shortage, trucking produce south for sale in the Newcastle markets and further magnifying the problems of local farmers. The same autumn rain which caused so much trouble for the vegetable growers is now having an effect on graziers as well. The Department of Agriculture warned of a possible summer feed crisis following the flooding of thousands of hectares of the lower Hunter lucerne crop. The lucerne literally drowned in the long-lying water, rotting from the roots up. It would have provided vital summer feed. Now farmers are at the mercy of the weather and already feeling the effects of what a hot summer could bring. October will be remembered as the month of the low-gold moth invasion. The fluttering fly-by-nights descended on the coastal region in swarms. The experts said they were blown off course by strong westerly winds and would soon be gone. Although they plagued householders for several weeks, the experts proved right, and as mysteriously as they came, they vanished.
The Arbitration Commission has also asked the NFF to come to an agreement with the Australian Workers' Union on how pastoral workers should pay the compulsory 3% superannuation, and that more than 30% of them are already involved in superannuation schemes. NFF Director
top quality fleeces fetching record prices. The surge of wool is largely to do with its rebirth as the fashion fabric. Around the world, wool was the basis of much of the winter wardrobe, and in an attempt to maintain the impetus in spring, the Australian Wool Corporation launched its Wool Wool collection, hoping to make the fleece as indispensable in summer as it is in winter. (1988) was of course our bicentenary of white settlement, and the occasion was celebrated with a wide range of commemorative events. One of the most significant in the Hunter was the Great Merrymore to Maitland Cattle Drive. Around 700 head were included in the epic trek, which covered around 400 kilometres of the old cattle trails. It was probably the last time such a large mob will be moved on the hoof anywhere in Australia. The 30-day drove marked the end of an era, one that will be sadly missed by those who made their living in the saddle.
Freedom, I suppose, and fresh air. That you're not breathing the same air that most of the other people are breathing, are you?
Another era came to an end this year with the making of the very last Singleton cheese. The Hunter Valley Dairy Company decided it could no longer afford to make the cheese, and the last batch went through this month at the Singleton Dairy Factory. The cheese was one of the second-hand cheeses Australia still made, and according to the company, is no longer a viable process. The cheese of the manpower-intensive process has changed over the years. One of those most successful by the closure was according to head manager Bevan Spinks. Mr. Spinks' life revolved around the cheese since he started with the factory 40 years ago.
Someone might know someone half as good.
Is there anything as good?
No, not in my opinion.
This year also marked what could be the beginning of the end for one of the country's most colourful but most unwelcome plants, Patterson's curse. The Department of Agriculture hopes a moth, the Echium leaf miner, will destroy it. After lengthy laboratory tests, the department received permission this year to release the moth into the field. The moth kills the plant by mining its leaves. The department claims it poses a minimal threat to other plants. 1988 also saw the arrival on the market of what could become one of Newcastle's most famous food exports. Naturally, the super lean beef was developed by local butcher.
The reason behind it was that the father died at age 48 of
calorie content
heart
of the meat is significantly reduced using his secret process. Consumer reaction to the trial in July was just what the producers hoped for.
Well, it's spicy, isn't it? It's lovely. It's got a different taste about it, but I like this. This is nice.
1988 also saw the introduction of new legislation governing co-ops, which tore battle lines through the dairy farmers' co-op. The laws required the co-op to axe its dry shareholders before October. The dries fought back, holding strategy meetings and lobbying the government to change the rules. Giant food company Panfighter, which owns Bedella, also became embroiled in the dispute, offering the dries significantly more for their shares than the co-op was offering to buy them back. The dries eventually won a partial victory. The Minister for Cooperatives, Jerry Peacock, promising he would look at modifying the co-op legislation to give non-active shareholders some equity but no voting rights. This year we also took you to Australia's largest agricultural field days, AgWeb. In 1988, the 16-hectare site near Gunnedah featured more exhibitors than it has since before the rural recession. AgWeb is a showcase of the very latest in agricultural technology, ranging from the traditional forms through to this year's show stealer, the rubber tracked Caterpillar tractor. And speaking of technology on the farm, our kids bring present to neighbours. They visit the Hobbit to inspire the assistance of a toy, although it will sell their field and roll too. We have in fact come a long way in agriculture since our forebears did their best with the likes of these. The 1980s may be the decade of the silicon chip, but there's still a magic in the craftsmanship of the old timers. The elderly man was killed at the intersection of Moorhead Street and Newcastle Road just after 10 o'clock. According to eyewitnesses, he had almost reached the far side of the pedestrian crossing when he was struck by a four-wheel drive vehicle.
It's just about crossed the yellow lines here to the median strip when a rather large four-wheel drive come through and just totally cleaned him up. And
police say the man died almost instantly. The accident has angered nearby residents who have long been lobbying for traffic lights at the intersection. A large elderly population lives in the area and the crossing is gaining a notorious reputation.
It's been 5 since I've lived here that I've picked up off the crossing, 5 old people, and about 3 of them are dead. Whenever it happens, you know, we try and get something done about it. The DMR will send someone out, but nothing ever gets done.
According to residents, much of the traffic on Newcastle Road travels at well over the speed limit of 60 kilometres per hour, and a pedestrian crossing fails to stop many vehicles. They say there will be more deaths unless lights are installed. The Society last offered the chance to travel up the historic line in May. Back then it ran as far as Jules Crossing. Today, however, the trains can only go as far as the former Redhead station as the line has been cut back, and even that trip has a limited life. The line serves the BHP colliery at Redhead. When that closes in years to come, the line will go too. It was built in the late 1880s to serve collieries from Whitebridge to Belmont. Later it also carried passengers, although that service was eventually abandoned in 1971. continue to run several a year until the line is closed for good. Sailors from the HMAS Cessnock took pride of place at the head of the procession, exercising their right of entry to the city, which was granted in 1986. In all, 2,000 people representing 130 community groups marched, and thousands of townsfolk abandoned Saturday shopping to watch the spectacle go past. Schools made up many of the entries, some taking the Bi-centenary theme to heart and dressing accordingly, although not necessarily with any reflection on individual characters. The weather for the parade couldn't have been better. Some showed true ingenuity in the face of sunburn, and the students at Taekwondo went to extreme lengths to prove their feet weren't going to be hurt by simply walking on hot tar. No parade, of course, is complete without its marching bands. The New South Wales Police Band, among others, gave the proceedings a lively note.
Here we're going to see great.
For years, Newcastle has produced some of the best surfers in the world, and for the fourth year in a row, the locals have been able to compete against the world's best in front of a home crowd. Surfest has grown since its inception. This year, the men's main event carried $55,000 in prize money, the only AA-rated event on the Australian leg of the world circuit. Great action throughout the week suggested today would produce some exciting competition, and despite the changeable weather, contestants delivered the goods.
There's a noticeable change in the ability of most of the surfers, even from last year. The manoeuvres that most of the surfers are doing this year are a little more refined than what they were last year. I think the level of competition is increasing all the time.
Surfest is not just a boon for the competitors. It presents Newcastle to the rest of the world in a different light, not as an industrial city, but as a beach lover's paradise, a PR exercise that inevitably costs money. Last night, NBN played host to the major sponsors of the event. Dinner, also attended by some of the top surfers, was to thank sponsors including BHP, Coca-Cola and NBN. Meanwhile, those experts who know the other side of life in the sun today used Surfest to highlight the need to cover up. A $6,000 cheque was presented to the Newcastle Melanoma Unit by the Master Plumbers Association and Newcastle Electrical Contractors. The money will help pay for a new display van, which will visit shopping centres over the next 3 months, promoting skincare in the sun and the NBN Telethon.
The imminent retirement of John Lysart has prompted the high-powered movement. The man chosen to take up his role as General Manager of the Sydney-based Coated Products Division is Bill Farrens, currently the head of Rodden Bar.
The source of
Mr.
raw
Farrens
material
has been
that
with
is scrap,
BHP since
and these mills
1956
all over the
and
world
moved to
are
Newcastle
sited
2 years ago.
within.
His appointment means Newcastle's Rodden Bar Division needs a new head. The man chosen,
well, again, one of the reasons for the environmental impact studies that are done these days is to get all these things out there.
He was made General
and it's up
Manager
to
of
engineers
BHP's Collieries
to
Division in
design plant and equipment,
1985
not like
and
they
General
used to be,
Manager of
perhaps in
Planning
the
and
past,
Development
but
in
to modern
1987.
standards.
Both Mr. Farrens and Mr. Chenery will take up their new positions in February.
Teams came from as far as Albury in the south and Inverell in the north for the finals. The season began with 400 teams competing in 2 divisions, Open and Girls, playing on a home and away basis throughout the state. Last week, Toronto was knocked out of the Open section quarterfinals, as was Caves Beach in the Girls. Summersby from the Central Coast, seen here in the yellow and black strip, got through in the girls section final, but finished the day in 3rd position, behind Lavington and the champion team Ulladulla. Sydney side Vardy's Road won the Open division from another Sydney team, Georges Hall and Moree.
For Andrew Ferry, the appointment is the pinnacle of a career with the council, which began in 1954. Since starting as a junior clerk, he has worked in numerous departments, most recently spending 9 years as Deputy Town Clerk to Don McIndoe. Mr McIndoe died suddenly in October. The council advertised the position of Town Clerk and received applications from across the state. After final interviews yesterday, the council unanimously voted to upgrade Andrew Ferry to the job. It's a challenge Mr Ferry says he is looking forward to.
I've been fortunate enough to be able to work my way through the various council departments, and I think by that experience I come to the job now with fairly wide knowledge of what is required, and quite hopeful that I will be able to perform the job that, as I say, council has entrusted to me.
As Town Clerk, Mr Ferry will be called on to attend many official functions. His first came very early in the job with a celebratory morning tea, courtesy the council administration staff. The fair officially opened at midday, but such is its popularity, thousands were filling the streets well before then. The King Street Christmas Fair was first held in 1978, and it is now recognised as the longest running and largest of its type in the state. Traditionally held on the first Sunday in December, it signals the start of the Christmas season and wouldn't be complete without Santa, although he may have been pining for the North Pole, as today also brought some truly Christmas weather, the mercury soaring into the 30s. The conditions didn't seem to deter the shoppers, however. Organisers estimate around 40,000 wandered through the temporary mall in search of Christmas bargains, available from more than 140 stall holders. What do you think is the big attraction that keeps bringing the crowds back?
I think two things. I mean, we've been going for 10 years now, so it's almost an institution. It is the beginning of the Christmas season, but also there are such great bargains here.
But there's more to the fair than simply bargain hunting. Today must rate as one of the few times King Street shoppers can pat a baby wombat or sit in the middle of the road and enjoy some live music. The fair finished at 6 o'clock. The regatta took several months to organise, but even the best planners can't supply wind on demand, and this morning, no matter how small you were, paddling was faster than sailing. However, by the time the small catamarans lined up for the first start of the day, there was enough breeze to give the race some direction. 7 classes of catamaran competed in the regatta. The start staggered to avoid the chaos of 150 boats heading for the line at the same time. The field was open to all comers and featured some big names in catamaran sailing, including several past state and national champions and current Australian and world champion in the NACRA 5.8's Brett Watson. This year's regatta carried additional importance, also being the state titles for 3 classes of catamaran, the Cobras, NACRAs and Hobie Cats.
John Dyson and Mark Taylor set about making quick runs on the resumption this morning. Taylor with some power hitting on both sides of the wicket and Dyson with delicate cuts and glances. After compiling a good 78, Terry Alderman got one through Dyson's defence and the Blues had lost their first wicket. Taylor really set after the attack, clubbing 4s at will. His partner Mark Waugh also joined the onslaught with shots like this great drive. Taylor was finally out caught behind after getting a tickle to a rising Bruce Reid delivery for a fine 83. Smith was next to go, also being caught behind off an Alderman delivery. Waugh continued to hammer the attack, but his luck finally ran out caught at cover for 39. Matthews on 5 and trying to force the pace was picked up by Mullally, as was Trevor Bayliss, also off Mullally. At the fall of Dyer's wicket, the New South Wales captain declared, and Western Australia set about the task of scoring 385 for victory off a minimum of 122 overs. And WA made a disastrous start in their run chase, with Ganella being brilliantly caught by Steve Smith off the bowling of Stobbo, and Western Australia were 1 for 1.